what's going on here. All tangled up. All right, guys, let's get going. So our topic today is going to be supply and demand problems, but I'm calling these basic problems. So they're going to start kind of easy, meaning one shift, and then we're going to add some complexities, but we're not going to do that until we kind of master the basics. So up to now, we've done some mechanics, and it hasn't been very exciting stuff, I agree. We have learned about demand and demand shifters. We've learned about supply and supply shifters, but we've not done anything with it because we've not put anything together. So understand that so far we've shifted just demand, we've shifted just supply, but today we need to talk about markets. So when we do supply and demand problems, guys, I want to emphasize to you that what we're illustrating is markets. And so to illustrate markets, we need both supply and demand together. So that's what we're going to be working on today, merging supply and demand so that we can look at markets. The first thing we need to do before we even do any problems is we need to illustrate a market and talk about how we're going to show impact. So let's draw one big graph. And on the vertical axis, just like we did with supply and demand, we're going to put price. And on the horizontal axis, we're going to put quantity. Now, remember, when we were talking about demand, quantity was quantity demanded. And when we talked about supply, quantity was quantity supplied, right? But it doesn't matter. Quantity demand is a quantity supplied is a quantity. So it's all the same thing, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to put our downward sloping demand curve. So let's say we have demand for X. And let's add our upward sloping supply curve. Here's supply of X. And we're going to call this the market for X, whatever X is. Now the point that we're interested in is this equilibrium. So this point where supply and demand intersect is what we call our market equilibrium. So market equilibrium. So market equilibrium is going to be found at the point where supply and demand intersect. And so it's not a bad idea to label this. Let's label this E. So on your graphs, when you do supply and demand problems, you're going to want to label E because E might change if demand shifts. And so I might need to call my new equilibrium something else. So E, E1, E2, or E0, E1, E2, your choice. All right. Now at this equilibrium, we get PE, which is our equilibrium price. And we get QE, which is our equilibrium quantity. And by equilibrium quantity, we're talking about the number of units exchanged. The number of units exchanged. Now, why this equilibrium is of interest is the following. So let's talk about what we mean by an equilibrium. Well, think about in chemistry. In chemistry, you did some kind of chemical reaction and you had molecules spitting and fizzing and moving around. And then remember, it settled down to some kind of steady state. And we called that the equilibrium of the chemical reaction, right? Because nothing was moving around. Nothing was changing anymore. And we mean exactly the same thing in equilibrium. So in economics, so when we say equilibrium in economics, we're talking about a point of stability. a point of stability. So specifically, what is stable? Well, the thing that's stable is that PE is stable. Because we see that PE is the price that clears the market. That's how we say it in economics, that PE is the price that clears the market. So PE is the price that clears the market. Now, what do I mean by clear the market? I mean that since supply equals demand, then we know that quantity supplied exactly equals quantity demanded. So by clearing the market, we have a situation where there's no shortage and no surplus. So the market's cleared. There's no shortage and no surplus. So if there's no shortage and no surplus, does price need to change? No, there's going to be no adjustment to price. So let's think about that for a second. If there was a shortage, if we're looking in a market and we see that there's a shortage, what's the market going to do to price? When we have a shortage, what does price do? Price goes up, right? So if we have some kind of shortage, the market is going to signal to producers and suppliers that they should raise their price, right? But what if we have a surplus? If we have a surplus, if there was a surplus, and remember what we mean by surplus, we've got goods that we're not moving. So what would that signal to suppliers and producers? What should they do to price? They should lower their price, right? They should lower their price. So when there's a shortage or a surplus, price is going to change, right? But if there's no surplus and no shortage, then price won't change. It's a point of stability, okay? So at this point, when we say that we have a cleared market, when the market clears and supply exactly equals demand and quantity supplied exactly equals quantity demand, well, then what we're saying is that everyone who wants this good at PE is able to get it. As many units as they want. So everyone who wants this good, as many units as they want, at a price PE is able to get what they want. So there's no need for price to go up or price to go down. So is everybody with me here? This makes sense why we're interested in this intersection of supply and demand. Okay? So let's add on a little bit then. If instead, guys, we were in a situation like this, so let's let this be the market for X. And again, quantity and price are on my axes. So we have an upward sloping supply and a downward sloping demand curve. But now instead, let's let price be up here, price P1. So if we're at price P1, then we're on point A of our demand curve. So if we're on point A of our demand curve, then this would be quantity demanded. And at price P1, we're on point B of our supply curve. So that's going to be quantity supplied. So what do we have here, guys? What kind of situation do we have? We've got a situation where we have a surplus. Everyone agree with that? We have a surplus. So if we have a surplus, then what's the invisible hand in the market going to do? What signal are they sending to producers and suppliers? What should they do to their price? They should do what? Lower their price. Okay, so if they lower their price, do you agree that we move this way on the demand curve, right? Because the law of demand says lower price and quantity demanded goes up. But on our supply curve, if you have a lower price, quantity supplied goes down. Do you see what's happening? How we're going to move ourselves into this equilibrium situation? So price is going to adjust. And think about what we know. Price is going to go down because when you have a surplus, price goes down. And we know that the law of demand says if price goes down, then quantity demanded goes up. All else constant. So guys, are we seeing the law of demand at work here? Are we moving along the demand curve? Price goes down and quantity demanded is going up. Does everyone agree? And then we have the same thing for law of supply. If price goes down, quantity supplied goes down, right? I want to put less babysitting on the market if I'm going to get less money. Again, all else constant. But the whole point is that the law of demand will work here. The law of supply works here. And we're going to move to an equilibrium. And of course, we've already said that when we move to that equilibrium, that we're going to be at price PE, where quantity demanded is exactly equal to quantity supplied. We've eliminated the surplus. That makes sense to everyone? We've eliminated the surplus. Now, guys, does government need to be involved in doing this? Does this happen because government says, hey, everyone needs to lower their price? No. So we need to understand how cool this is that this happens effortlessly without anyone having to set a regulation, without anyone having to set a law, without somebody calling producers and suppliers and say, here's what you need to do, right? It all kind of works like this well-oiled machine. So you wake up and you see bread on the shelves at Walmart because the market is going to respond. When prices are too high and we have surpluses, prices go down. And when we have prices that are too low because they create shortages, prices will go up. And there will be things to buy. All right, everybody with me? So now that we understand the market, guys, we need to look at what happens when supply or demand changes. Okay? So what happens when supply or demand changes? Okay. So a very simple example. Let's say that we have the market for good X, and it's initially in equilibrium. So it's in the state of market equilibrium. So the market for good X is in the state of market equilibrium. But then number of demanders of X increases. And we want to know, how will this impact the market for X. Okay. All right. So very simple, guys. We're going to use 3 steps, and you're going to have problems on test 2 that you have to work exactly like this. And since a whole bunch of you didn't read any of your instructions on test 1, if you don't do that on test 2, you're going to get lots of points missing because I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, but it's going to be exactly like this. So your 3 steps are going to be as follows. 1, you're going to identify the CPA or other shifter, right? Because they're not all CPAs. And you're going to give a full statement. I'm looking to make sure that you understand what has shifted. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a graph, and you're going to label it fully. So draw your graph, label it fully. And then number 3, you're going to summarize by telling me the impact on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And if you stick to those steps, guys, you won't say stupid things. If you start writing paragraphs, you're going to say things that make no sense. You're going to confuse demand and quantity demanded and supply and quantity supplied. So if you stick to what I've asked you to do, you'll make less errors. Okay? All right. So what would this look like then for this problem? Very simple. So what's our CPA here? I've given you a very easy one. What's our CPA? What's going on in this problem that moves us out of equilibrium? Number of demanders has changed, right? So you're not just going to put number of demanders. You're going to be very clear. Number of demanders has done what? Gone up, right? And I know everyone knows that that's a demand shift. So demand for X is going to do what? If number of demanders is going up, then demand for X does what? Increases, right? So that's a full statement. Number of demanders have gone up, and so we know demand for X goes up. So now we need to draw a graph. And you need to label it fully, including your axes. And because you're going to have some problems that might have more than one market, you need to be very clear what you're drawing. So we're drawing the market for X. So label your market. Now, before you do anything, before you shift anything, you need to indicate your original price and quantity. So my original equilibrium price is P0, and my original equilibrium quantity is Q0. So you're going to label everything fully before you shift anything, right? That makes sense to everyone? That way you're not going to make any errors in your labeling. But now we have an increase in demand. So how do I draw an increase in demand, everybody? Shift to the right, good. So it's always a good idea to draw an arrow so you don't mess anything up. And you need to label your new demand curve something else because it's not the same demand curve, so I can't call it D. I need to call it something like D1. But now I have a new market equilibrium. So we're at P1 and Q1. So sometimes it helps to label your equilibrium. So this is E, So this would be my new equilibrium. I'll call it E1. All right, so that's a well-drawn graph, and everything is labeled, right? And so now the last thing you have to do is summarize the impact on equilibrium price and quantity. So what has happened to equilibrium price, everybody, as a result of this demand shock? Equilibrium price was P0, and now it's P1, so price did what? Went up, right? So you're going to say equilibrium price has gone up. And what about equilibrium quantity? Equilibrium quantity has done what? It was Q0. Now it's Q1. Does everyone agree that it's gone up? So this is the answer. So guys, nothing really hard here, right? Nothing really hard here. If this is a multiple choice question, like on quizzes and homework, what I'm going to be asking you is the impact on equilibrium price and quantity. So a multiple choice question would say equilibrium price went up and equilibrium quantity went down, equilibrium price went down and equilibrium quantity went up, all four combinations, right? So easy, steps 1, 2, 3. So we're going to spend our time today going through some practice problems. Okay, so give me a second to pass these out. Everyone have one? Everyone have one? All right, guys. So this homework problem, this practice problem set, is exactly like what we just did. These are the easiest of problems. I'm calling this basic problems. And so let's work these together. So number 1 says that Japanese car producers are forced to pay higher prices for heavy metals. How will this affect the equilibrium price and quantity of Japanese cars? So the first thing we have to figure out is, what is the ceteris paribus assumption that is most relevant here? So Japanese car producers are paying higher prices for heavy metals. How does that affect production in terms of price and quantity of Japanese cars? What is the ceteris paribus, guys? Cost of inputs, right? Cost of inputs. So guys, you have to know these ceteris paribus assumptions like the back of your hand. Okay? So you would say that a complete statement, a full statement would be price of inputs to Japanese cars have done what? Gone up or down? Gone up or down, everyone? What does the question say? Has gone up, right? So is that a supply or demand shock? Supply shock. So the supply of Japanese cars is going to do what? Metal is more expensive, so supply does what? Supply. Everybody, give me a finger up. Don't give me the finger. But give me a point the finger up or down. Point the finger up or down. All right, good. Okay, so guys, anything difficult there? The only hard part is finding the ceteris paribus assumption. Once you find the ceteris paribus assumption, this is easy, right? So now we need to draw a graph. Okay. So supply and demand, make sure you label your axes. Remember to start by labeling your original price and quantity. And you can label them as you want. I just am in the habit of P0, Q0. But if you like something better, that's fine. But don't forget, guys, label your market. So this is the market for Japanese cars. So now we need to shift our supply. So how do I draw a supply decrease, everyone? Shift to the left. Good. All right. Not up or down, right? Because it kind of looks like it's going up, right? It's always left or right. So again, get in the habit of putting an arrow in so that you can follow your own work. Label your new supply curve, S1. I have a new equilibrium now. So P1 and Q1. Easy stuff, right? Easy stuff. So the last thing you have to do is tell me the impact on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So when we see the supply decrease driven by increased price of inputs, what happens to equilibrium price, everybody? Increases. And what about quantity? So what that tells us is that price is going up and fewer cars are exchanged. So make sure you understand what QE is telling us. This is going to be telling us that fewer cars are exchanged. So why are fewer cars exchanged? Maybe people are going and buying substitutes, right? So maybe instead they're buying German cars. Okay. All right. Any questions with number 1? Any questions? All right. Let's look at number 2. So number 2 says, how will the events in 1 impact the domestic car market in the United States? So now we're trying to connect this to what we just learned. Okay. So what is the relevant ceteris paribus assumption here, guys? Trade barriers? I haven't said anything about trade barriers. So let's go through them all. Let's think about supply. Is it technology? No. Is it price of inputs? No, right? We've already done that. We're trying to figure out how does this connect to the United States' market. Is it price of other things we could produce instead? Is it expectations of future prices? Is it number of suppliers? No. So it doesn't sound like it's any of the supply shifters. Is it income? So demand shifters. Is it preferences? Is it price of related goods? Does that sound at all like it could be the connection? How might these be related? They're complements. So remember, complements are things I consume together. So when I buy a Japanese car, I buy an American car. So they are what? Substitutes. Good. So these are substitutes. The relationship between Japanese cars and American cars is that they are substitutes. So I need to write my ceteris paribus statement carefully. Can I just write substitutes? Do you think you're going to get full credit for that on a test? No. So don't rip yourself off of points. We need to say that price of a substitute to American cars, right? Because that's what we're modeling now. Price of a substitute to American cars has done what? Gone up. Right? So again, what are we talking about? We're talking about that we've seen a price increase in Japanese cars, which offer a substitute. So is this a supply shift or a demand shift in American cars? Substitutes. Is that a demand shifter or a supply shifter? Demand shifter, right? So we know it's a demand shifter. So demand for American cars is going to do what? When the substitute gets more expensive, demand does what? When Coke gets more expensive, demand for Pepsi does what? If Coke gets more expensive, demand for Pepsi goes which way? Up. Good. So demand for American cars goes up. Now, guys, keep it simple. When Japanese cars get more expensive, people substitute towards alternatives, right? So we want to make a note, right? To ourselves, people are substituting away from Japanese cars and toward American cars. All right? Does that make sense to everybody? So now let's draw it. So this is the market for American cars. So again, you don't shift anything till you've labeled all your parts. So here's my equilibrium initially. So now we need to shift our demand curve. Which way do we shift, guys? To the right. Good. Label it something new. D1. Label your new equilibrium. And after we're done drawing, we need to summarize our answers. So what's happened to the price of American cars? Price of American cars has done what, everyone? Gone which way? Up, good. And quantity exchanged of American cars has done what? Increased. So we're selling more cars. That makes sense. And as demand goes up, it drives prices up a little bit. Does it mean prices are doubling or anything like that? No. We're not trying to say that. Maybe it could be a very marginal effect. But the exciting thing is we're selling more cars. So guys, before you leave a question, it's imperative that you make sure that the answer matches your intuition. If people are substituting away from Japanese cars and towards American cars, quantity should be going up, right? We should be selling more cars, and we are. So make sure that your answer seems logical. And if your answer seems really counterintuitive, then you've probably made a mistake. Either you've got the wrong ceteris paribus assumption, or you've switched it from demand to supply or supply to demand by accident, okay? All right. Number 3. President Clinton has approved the release of oil from the strategic oil reserves held by the government. So President Clinton has approved the release of oil from the strategic oil reserves held by the government. How does this impact the market for oil? So what we're saying here, guys, is that the U.S. holds a reserve of oil. I don't think we do it as much anymore. And sometimes we would release oil into the market. So what ceteris paribus assumption seems most relevant here? What do we think? Is it expectations of future prices? Okay. Remember, guys, for me to write a question about expectations, I have to have some kind of change in expectations with an announcement, right? It can't just be, right? Do you think most people even know the government has released oil from the oil reserves? No. So is that changing our expectations, do you think? Probably not, because we don't know about it. So remember, expectations comes from an announcement, a regulation, a law that we pass. So does this sound like expectations? Because that's something that kind of affects the entire market. My guess is we don't even know about this. So that's probably not it. What might be another one? Go down your list. Number of suppliers? Okay, well, let's think about it. Does it sound like demand at all? Does this sound like a demand shift? No, so we can rule out everything on demand. Let's go down our supply shifters. Does this sound like technology? Does it sound like price of inputs? Have I said anything about producing something with inputs? No. Does it sound like expectations? No, there's no announcement to change our expectations. Price of other things we could produce instead, does it sound like that? No. Number of suppliers? All we've got left is number of suppliers, weather, civil unrest, quotas and tariffs. So what do you think it is? When the government is putting oil on the market, are they acting as a supplier? So what do you think it is? Number of suppliers, right? So you would say that number of suppliers went up. So number of suppliers of oil went up. So in this case, government is acting as a supplier. So what did we say? Supply or demand shock, guys? Supply or demand? Okay, so supply of oil has gone up. So draw your graph. Label your equilibrium. So guys, which way am I shifting my supply curve? To the right or to the left? It's right, not up or down. It's left or right. Which way am I shifting my supply curve? To the right. Which is kind of weird because it looks like it's going down, right? And that's what's confusing to people. That's why I will emphasize over and over left versus right, not up or down, because then you'll get it backwards, because this is a supply increase, but it kind of looks like it's shifting downward, but it's not. It's not a decrease. All right, so our new equilibrium price, P1, our new equilibrium quantity, Q1, I apologize, we needed to label our market for oil. So here's our initial equilibrium, and here's our new equilibrium, E1. And now we can summarize the effect. So equilibrium price has done what, everybody? Has gone down, right? Equilibrium price has gone down. And equilibrium quantity has done what? Has gone up. So this would be your answer. So then, guys, why do you think our government releases oil from our oil reserves? Why do you think we do it? What's the goal, do you think, when we're releasing oil from the oil reserves? What are we trying to do to price? Trying to drive price which way? Down, right? We're trying to drive price down. So if oil gets really expensive and we have large stocks of oil, we can release some oil from the reserves and try to get oil prices down. Okay? All right. So next question, number 4, given the answer to 3, how will the market for gasoline be affected? Okay. How will the market for gasoline be affected? And again, I'm asking you for the same 3 steps here. So we have to figure out, what is the shifter? What is the shock? How are oil and gasoline related? How are they related? Are they complements? But here we're talking about crude oil. Do I go buy gas and say, give me a gallon of crude oil? No. So what's the connection between oil and gas? They're substitutes, so we don't have any gas at the gas station, so I'm going to just fill my car with crude oil. Does that sound right? No. All right, so what is the connection between oil and gas, guys? How do we make gasoline? How do we make it? How do we make gasoline, guys? What is the key ingredient in gasoline? Oil. Oil, right? Guys, gasoline is petroleum-based. So if we need oil to make gasoline, and we just said price of oil is going down, what's my shifter? Price of inputs, right? Price of inputs. So price of inputs to gasoline are going which way? Price of inputs to gasoline are going which direction, up or down? Well, what did we just learn in question 3? Everyone look back. Are going which way? Going down, right? Where did we get that from? We got that from because in the previous question, we see price of oil going down, right? So price of inputs to gas are going down. So does that sound like a demand shifter or a supply shifter? Is that demand or supply, guys? It's a supply shifter. So if price of inputs are going down, does supply go up or does it go down? Everybody, if price of inputs are going down, does supply go up or down? Up. All right. So draw it. Draw it. I'm going to wait here for a second, and you're going to draw it. So which way did you shift your supply curve, everyone? To the right. Good. You've labeled your new price, P1, quantity, Q1. So what's happened to the equilibrium price of gas, everybody? It went down, and equilibrium quantity went up. So guys, could this be another reason we release oil from our strategic oil reserves? Because when we do, oil gets cheaper, but gas always gets cheaper, right? Gas and oil move together. Okay. All right. Let's look at number 5. Number 5, the United States is currently in a recession and real incomes are falling. The U.S. is in a recession, real incomes are falling. How will this impact the market for automobiles? Okay. What's the CPA here, guys? Income. All right. What's happening to income? Incomes are doing what? Incomes are going down, and we need to note automobiles. We have to determine, is that a normal good or an inferior good? Automobiles, normal good or inferior good? When I get more income, do I buy more automobiles or less? Or more on automobiles or less? More, right? So it's like dining out. It's like vacations, right? This is a normal good. Okay, so we need to note income's falling and cars are a normal good. Now guys, on a test, if I ask you about income, you're going to have to tell me what your assumption is. So make a note to yourselves right now, this part of the question where I am told by you, is this normal or inferior? That's going to be required. You have to give that to me in the CPA statement, okay? So that I can follow your work. All right, so incomes are falling and cars are a normal good. So is that a demand shock or a supply shock? Demand. All right, so demand for cars are gonna do what? What happens to demand for cars? It goes up or down, guys? goes down, right? When our incomes fall, we buy fewer vacations, we dine out less, we buy fewer automobiles. We don't usually run out and say, I got laid off, let's buy a car, right? We say, this is not a good time to buy a car. All right, so everyone draw it. Which way did you shift your demand curve? To the left. Good. All right. So you've shifted your demand curve to the left. You've labeled your new price and quantity. Everyone have a graph that looks like mine? So what has happened to equilibrium price? Price has gone down, and equilibrium quantity has gone down. All right. Now, the next question says, based on what you determined in 5, how will this impact the market for used cars? Used cars. So, and this is a little misstated. Let's just focus on the income change, not the price of cars. So income has gone down, right? So income goes down. And used cars are what kind of good? Used cars are an inferior good. So then what happens to the demand for used cars, everyone? Does it go up or down? It goes up. We see more used cars being exchanged. So do we know how to draw this? Do we know how to draw it? All right. So take a second, draw it. All right, so which way did you shift your demand curve? To the right. Good. So do we agree? For used cars, price might go up a little bit. I'm not saying it doubles or anything like that, but it might go up a little bit, but more cars are going to be exchanged. All right, so guys, you've got to learn your shifters. Your task for the weekend on top of your homework is to memorize your ceteris paribus assumptions. If you don't know them, this becomes much harder, okay? So please focus on that, read your announcements, and have a lovely weekend, everybody.